Maria Archila has been a leader in the fight for immigrant rights, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, and women's rights for 2 decades, and she's running for lieutenant governor of New York in this year's elections.
Maria says there are universal issues facing New Yorkers, such as housing, the cost of childcare, that she expects will be dominant issues in the election this year. And she joins us now to discuss her run. Welcome to you, Maria.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So tell us, why you are running and what you think you can deliver for the people of New York.
So I have been a community organizer for 20 years, initially as part of the immigrant rights movement. I came to the U.S. when I was 17 years old, and it was in New York that I found a new home, a place that welcomed me. It was in New York that I found the safety to love who I love, to be queer, to be proud. It was in New York where my children were born. And it's in New York where I learned about the power that is unleashed when people organize, when workers organize to fight for dignity in the workplace, when young people fight to have access to good schools and good colleges, and when parents organize for good housing. But in New York is one of the richest states in the country, but it's also one of the most unequal. And it's unequal because of decades of policies that reaffirm inequality. And it shouldn't be that way. New York should be a place where everyone can live with dignity, where every person can have access to a home, to good schools, to the systems of care that we all need, from childcare to home care. And that is entirely possible if we have elected officials in Albany who actually focus on the priorities of working families instead of the demands of billionaires and corporate executives. So I decided to run for lieutenant governor because this is an office that has been very underutilized, an office that has been used just as a representative of the governor in ribbon-cutting ceremonies, instead of an office that is actually lifting up the agenda and the issues that matter to working families whose voices always get left behind. And I think my experience as an organizer helps me bring that sort of sensibility of knowing that communities who are facing the challenges of these policies that reaffirm inequality also have the solutions, and we need to listen to them, and we need to try to pierce through the fortress of lobbyists and donors to actually make sure that in New York, people can live with dignity. So that's why I decided to run for lieutenant governor.
Yeah, Maria, your description of New York is reminding me that, although it's on the East Coast, in many ways, politically, it's like the Wild, Wild West. It is this place that people consider to be a liberal bastion. But I'm thinking back over the years, we had the IDC, which was this coalition of Democrats and Republicans that basically held up progressive policies despite there being a Democratic legislature. We have the specter of Eric Adams looming over the city with his agenda to get all of the papaya vendors off of the subway, as though that's the priority of people who are living in the city. You have people very frustrated over how the New York Health Act has been derailed over time. I wonder what your approach is going to be to dealing with the fact that there are so many conservative influences in the legislature, in an elected office in New York, that seem to be behaving in ways that's antithetical to what the majority of New Yorkers want out of their elected officials.
Yeah. So everywhere I go, people talk about the pressures that they are facing between jobs that don't pay enough and the cost of housing that keeps going up, whether people are renters and rents are going up and they're always worried that they're going to be evicted, or whether they are property owners, homeowners whose taxes are very crushing. And these pressures make New Yorkers feel like New York is not for them. And the fact is that there was a time when New York taxed millionaires at a fair share in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And during that time, we were able to build public parks, massive housing, Michelama housing, the SUNY educational system. But over the last several decades, we have stopped taxing millionaires and we have just put the burden on people. So people are very frustrated about what they see as Albany just having most, poor and middle-class New Yorkers hold the bag while the billionaires take and take and take. And in that environment, the politics of sort of fear, the the politics of division take a hold. And so Eric Adams sort of comes from that. He feeds into that fear that people have and says, well, we must invest in, law and order approach. Arrest the ladies selling mangoes in the subway instead of actually focusing on tackling the homelessness crisis that is very real. There are 92,000 New Yorkers sleeping on the streets or in shelters every single day in one of the richest states in the country. So at the same time that that's happening, we have 125 billionaires who live in New York, who made just over the last 2 years, $228 billion in new wealth during the pandemic. And New York is not taxing any of that. $228 billion in the hands of 125 people, while the state budget, the entire state budget, is $220 billion, so even less than what they
Can you explain how is New York not taxing any of that additional new wealth? What is the tax policy that's allowing that?
Well, we don't tax unrealized gains, right? So we say this is unrealized gain, so it cannot be taxed. But actually, if this is real money for banks are lending billionaires money against these unrealized gains. It should be real money for the tax system, right? So we should tax billionaires. We should make sure that we are not asking working class and middle class New Yorkers to give and give and give while the billionaires take and take and take. We could actually have a fair tax system that allows us to address the needs of New Yorkers who need affordable housing, who need access to childcare, who need access to healthcare. We could actually make the New York Health Act a reality if we had a fair tax system that we don't right now. And so I want to talk about the things that we are not doing, like taxing billionaires, and that within our reach, so that we can do for New Yorkers what they deserve, which is build a system of care that allows people to live with dignity and address the housing affordability crisis that is so profound in New York.
Right. Because people are, and Republicans are going to ride this issue to lots of success in upcoming elections. The fear that people have about the crime and the violence in the streets, on the subways in New York, that kind of stuff. And Eric Adams, obviously, mistreating mango vendors is something I think very deserving of mockery. But people are afraid of what they're seeing in the subway, what they're seeing in the streets. As I said, what is the plan to deal with that? If it's not more policing, that kind of thing, how do we fix the problem?
There was a survey commissioned by a project actually associated with Eric Adams. It's called New York City Speaks. It was a survey of 66,000 New York City residents. And they asked a bunch of questions, including what should we do about public safety? And 66,000 people gave excellent answers. They said, number one, affordable housing. Number two, invest in mental health services. And number three, respectful policing. So if only we did what New Yorkers say, we would actually be making tremendous headway to address the issue of rising violence. And it is true that there has been rising violence and rising domestic violence, intimate partner violence, gun violence. And we need to actually tackle each of those types of violence with the appropriate interventions. You cannot tackle gun violence with, social workers. Like, you actually need law enforcement for certain types of violence, but you cannot tackle violence that is related to crimes of poverty or mental health crisis with police armed in, riot gear. Like, we actually need to approach street violence with proven methods, like violence interruption methods. And we need to tackle intimate partner violence by creating safety for women who are in domestic violence situations. We need to make sure that we address the mental health crisis that is so profound, not just in New York, but across the country. The pandemic really destabilized people in all kinds of ways. And I believe that the safest communities are the best resource communities where people have jobs that pay well, where mothers are not having to work 2 and 3 jobs to pay rent and leave their children at home alone, where young people have access to after-school programs and jobs and youth services. And so that's what we have to do. And New Yorkers are saying that's what we have to do. So we should listen to them and invest in the right approaches to address the safety and well-being of everybody.
Maria Archila, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both so much.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.